In The Starry Night, Van Gogh puts style front and centre. A post-impressionistic masterpiece, the curved lines are meant to bounce your eyes between the stars, but a closer look reveals that the painting is composed of short, sharp brushstrokes, so that, in his words, their lines are contorted like those of ancient woodcuts. So what makes Van Gogh and his Starry Night unique? The answer to that is the way he uses colour. Van Gogh's Starry Night contrasts the darkness of the village, where only a few window panes of light can be seen, with the swirling brightness of the night sky, and jutting between these two juxtaposed worlds is the irredeemably dark cypress tree, a plant traditionally associated with mourning. Van Gogh was committed to a mental institution near St. Remy when he composed that painting. Given only a small space to work in, he had to paint from memory and scraps of his work, so far removed from the immediate experience of painting on location that he was used to. A year later, he would be dead at his own hand. Perhaps the village, like St. Remy, might appear calm and welcoming, a refuge from the chaos of the wild night sky, or maybe it is the other way round. The darkness of the village echoes the closeness of his little room and the claustrophobia of his depression, whilst the sky reminds us of the brilliant light of the universe and the greater meaning shining down upon us. This certainly makes some sense compared to Van Gogh's earlier attempt at capturing the night sky. In The Starry Night over the Rhone, the lights of the stars are somewhat dim compared to the brightness of the man-made light, which reflects across the river. Here, Van Gogh prizes the brightness of mankind. In Starry Night, however, the lightness of life in the village has faded for him to be replaced by the quasi-spiritual lights of the moon and the stars. Van Gogh retreats from the world, but whichever interpretation you take, the gloomy cypress tree pierces both realities and is inescapable. It spears both the calmness and the chaos, both the darkness of the night and the night's brilliant colour. But it also connects them and binds them together. It could be said that Van Gogh's painting is the most wonderful interpretation of human suffering into something beautiful and beyond the frame of words. Yet it can be framed by colour and composition, and no one uses colour in a more expressive and confounding way than Van Gogh. But to say that his use of colour is what makes Van Gogh unique is to miss the most important point. It seems that Van Gogh was colourblind. He used colour so brightly because he saw fewer colours than most. In this canvas of human suffering and resounding hope, Van Gogh uses bright colours because he could not distinguish the distinctions between closer ones. His limitations themselves freed him to create beauty. Perhaps what makes Van Gogh unique was that he genuinely saw the world differently. Van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter who posthumously became one of the most famous and influential figures in Western art history. In a decade, he created about 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings, most of which date from the last 2 years of his life. Vincent van Gogh was born in the Netherlands in March 1853. He was the eldest of 6 children. From a young age, he was acutely aware of social problems, and he devoted himself to the care of the poor and the sick. With such a strong social conscience, he had first felt called to a life devoted to God, but he failed to become a pastor. He developed an interest in painting and illustrating scenes from the lives of the miners in the Borinage region of Wallonia during the 1870s. It was here that he made his first drawings and artistic studies, which we now know about from the vast correspondence which in the main was to his brother Theo. His younger brother Theo supported him financially. The two kept long correspondence by letter. His early works, mostly still lifes and depictions of peasant labourers, contain few signs of the vivid colour that distinguished his later work. Born into an upper-class family, Van Gogh drew as a child and was serious, quiet and thoughtful. As a young man, he worked as an art dealer, often travelling, and became depressed after he was transferred to London. What I am, in the eyes of most people, an eccentric, non-entity or unpleasant person, somebody who has no position in society and will never have. In short, the lowest of low. All right then, even if that were absolutely true, then I should one day like to show my work what such an eccentric, such a nobody has in his heart. Though I am often in misery, there is still calmness, pure harmony and music inside me. I see paintings or drawings in the poorest of cottages, the dirtiest of corners, and my mind is driven towards these with an irresistible momentum. In July 1869, Van Gogh's uncle Son obtained a position for him at the art dealers Goupil & C in The Hague. After completing his training in 1873, he was transferred to Goupil's London branch on Southampton Street and took lodgings at 87 Hackford Road, Stockwell. This was a happy time for Van Gogh. He was successful at work and, at the age of 20, was earning more than his father. To support his religious conviction and his desire to become a pastor, in 1877 the family sent him to live with his uncle Johann Strichter, a respected theologian, in Amsterdam. Van Gogh prepared for the University of Amsterdam theology entrance exam. He failed the exam and left his uncle's house in July 1878. He undertook but also failed a 3-month course at a Protestant ministry school in Laeken near Brussels. In 1881, Van Gogh returned for an extended stay with his parents, and he set himself the task of learning to draw. He experimented endlessly with all sorts of drawing materials and concentrated on mastering technical aspects of his craft like perspective and anatomy. Most of his subjects were taken from peasant life. His cousin came to visit with her 8-year-old son, recently widowed Cornelia Key von Strichter, daughter of his mother, older sister Wilhelmina and Johann Strichter, and Vincent and her spent a fair amount of time together. He fell hopelessly in love with her and he made a proposal of marriage. At the end of January 1882, on his own account, Van Gogh met a homeless, pregnant prostitute named Sienne, who had been deserted by the father of her child she was carrying. The exact date of this meeting is not known beyond Van Gogh's dating of it in a letter to Theo written in May. Sienne was born in 1850, the eldest of 10 children of Peter Hornock, a porter of the poor district of East, and his wife. Peter died in 1875. To provide for the family, Sienne and her mother worked as seamstresses and cleaned homes. Their earnings were supplemented by what Sienne's brother Peter could provide from the income from his chair-making business. Sienne posed for Van Gogh, and in exchange Van Gogh provided her and her daughter with a roof over their heads and food on the table. Sienne was ill when he met her, and he did what he could to nurse her back to health. Van Gogh considered marrying Sienne to take care of her and keep her off the streets. He envisaged a life where Sienne would help him further his artistic career. Sienne wanted to marry him too, even though he was poor. His family, including his brother Theo, opposed the relationship, and his hope for continued support was doubtful. In June 1882, Van Gogh was hospitalised for gonorrhea. Disobeying doctor's orders, he left the hospital on July the 1st to visit Sienne in Leiden, where she had just given birth to a baby boy. Van Gogh moved to a larger studio next door with Sienne and her 2 children. Sienne required an extended period of recovery from a difficult pregnancy and delivery. The baby boy, though, seemed to bring much happiness to Van Gogh. Van Gogh left Sienne in the autumn of 1883 and went to Drenthe to paint. Sienne went back to work as a seamstress, charwoman, and possibly as a prostitute. Her children, Maria and Wilhelm, lived with her mother and brother Peter. In 1901, Sienne married a seaman. Sadly, she committed suicide in 1904 at the age of 54 in the Rotterdam harbour, 14 years after Van Gogh's death. In early 1886, Van Gogh went to live with his brother in Paris. There at last he was confronted with the full impact of the modern art, and especially with the recent work of the Impressionists. This gave him the opportunity to enjoy a rich artistic life in the city and visit the museums and art galleries. He met and was inspired by the best painters of the Impressionistic movement. He discovered that the dark palette he had developed back in Holland was hopelessly out of date. In order to brighten it up, he began painting still life and flowers. It is at this time that Van Gogh really developed his own identity. Attracted by the luminous nature and the southern skies and the warm colours, at the beginning of 1888, Van Gogh moved to Arles in Provence. He painted scenes of daily life and broadened his subject matter to include series of olive trees, wheat fields and sunflowers. He started painting in broader, more vibrant colours. His bright colour palette and style literally immersed the viewer in his compositions. He started to paint many landscapes, and although he still painted figures, there were not as many models. Since moving to the Yellow House in Arles, Van Gogh hoped that other artists would be attracted to the area too, and in late 1888 Paul Gauguin joined him. Van Gogh was nervous at the arrival of the legendary artist. In the beginning, things appeared to be going well. They shared expenses, split chores, and Gauguin cooked decadent meals. Absinthe flowed freely. They allowed themselves to be influenced by each other's style and subject matter, but the harmony was superficial and their relationship was mercurial. Van Gogh's aggression and disorderly character made the cohabitation intense. In a letter to painter Emile Bernard, Gauguin wrote, "Everywhere and in everything I have found disorder that shocked me. The colour box could hardly contain all those tubes, crowded together and never closed. In spite of all this disorder, this mess, something shone out of his canvases and out of his talk too. Their artistic perspective was divergent. Van Gogh's raison d'être was to paint from nature, whilst Gauguin encouraged him to paint from memory. Towards the end of the year, however, Van Gogh's optimism was fractured by the first signs of his illness, a type of epilepsy that took the form of delusions and psychotic attacks. The contentious cohabitation met a climatic end when it is said that after an altercation with Gauguin on the 23rd of December 1888, Van Gogh returned to his room where he was tormented by voices and severed his left ear with a razor, either wholly or in part, accounts differ, causing severe bleeding. He bandaged the wound, and then it is said to have wrapped his ear in paper and delivered the package to a woman at a brothel Van Gogh and Gauguin both frequented, with a note saying, "Here is a souvenir of me." Van Gogh was found unconscious the next morning by a policeman. Assuming that Van Gogh was dead, the police officer asked Gauguin, "What have you done to your comrade, sir?" Noting the traces of blood, and noting that Van Gogh was actually asleep, Gauguin pleaded with the officer to wake him gently and tell him that he had left for Paris. Van Gogh woke up totally lucid and was taken to hospital, where Felix Ray, a young doctor still in training, treated him. The ear was delivered to the hospital, but Ray did not attempt to reattach it as too much time had passed. Later, a Van Gogh researcher and art historian, Bernadette Murphy, discovered the true identity of the woman named Gabrielle, who died in Arles at the age of 80 in 1952, and whose descendants still live just outside Arles. Gabrielle, known in her youth as Gabby, was a 17-year-old cleaning girl at the brothel and other local establishments at the time that Van Gogh presented her with the ear. After this event, he chose to enter a psychiatric hospital in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. The institution was located in the region surrounded by wheat fields, vineyards, and olive groves, which would become the subject of many of his paintings. His paintings bear the mark of his unstable, tormented personality. Excessive tobacco and alcohol, tiredness and health problems made his condition worsen. Van Gogh suffered from several devastating epileptic seizures, which left him weak and bedridden for weeks and inhibited him from working. In July, Van Gogh wrote that he had become absorbed in the immense plain against the hills, boundless as the sea, delicate yellow. He had first become captivated by fields in May, when the wheat was young and green. In July, he described to Theo vast fields of wheat under turbulent skies. He wrote that they represented his sadness and extreme loneliness, and that the canvases tell you what I cannot say in words, that is, how healthy and invigorating I find the countryside. In 1890, Van Gogh decided to join his brother Theo in Paris, where he painted his last paintings, including the famous wheat field with the crows. It is good to love many things, for therein lies the true strength, and whosoever loves much and can accomplish much, and what is done in love is well done. Tree Roots is the final art that Van Gogh created. It was painted just hours before he shot himself. Prior to confirming the date of its creation, this radical departure in style led art critics to believe that the tree roots came from an earlier fascination with abstract arts. The exact date surrounding the painting was subject of much debate until an impossibly lucky clue unlocked the state of the work 130 years later. In May 2020, the scientific director at the Van Gogh Institute sorted through some old postcards in storage. One image was of a landscape photographed between 1900 and 1910. The shrubs featured the same roots as those in the Van Gogh last painting. Van Gogh's work included landscapes, still lifes, portraits and self-portraits, and were characterised by bold colours and dramatic, impulsive and expressive brushwork that contributed to the foundations of modern art. Not commercially successful, he struggled with severe depression and poverty, eventually leading to his suicide at the age of 37. On the 27th of July 1890, aged 37, Van Gogh is believed to have shot himself in the chest with a 7mm Lefaucheux pin-fire revolver. There were no witnesses, and he died 30 hours after the incident. The shooting may have taken place in the wheat field in which he had been painting, or a local barn. The bullet was deflected by a rib and passed through his chest without doing any apparent damage to any internal organs, probably stopped by his spine. He was able to walk back, where he was attended by 2 doctors, but without a surgeon present, the bullet could not be removed. The doctors tended to him as well as they could and left him alone in his room smoking his pipe. The following morning, Theo rushed to his brother's side, finding him in good spirits, but within hours Vincent's health began to fail, suffering from an untreated infection resulting from the wound. He died in the early hours of the 29th of July, and according to Theo, Vincent's last words were, "The sadness will last forever." During his lifetime, Van Gogh only sold one of his paintings, The Red Vineyard, which was painted in 1888, and it sold in Brussels in early 1890 for 400 Belgian francs. The most comprehensive primary source on Van Gogh is the correspondence between him and his younger brother Theo. Their lifelong friendship and most of what is known of Vincent's thoughts and theories of art are recorded in the hundreds of letters they exchanged from 1872 until 1890. Theo Van Gogh was an art dealer and provided his brother with financial and emotional support, as well as access to the influential people on the contemporary art scene. In January 1890, the critic Albert Oyer published an enthusiastic article about Van Gogh's work. Theo's health deteriorated in the months after the death of his brother. He was admitted to the Wilhelm Ernst Hospital, a psychiatric hospital in Den Dolder, on the 18th of November 1890. He had been diagnosed in Paris as suffering from progressive and general paralysis. Initial examination confirmed his diagnosis. By December the 1st, his medical notes confirmed he presented all the symptoms of dementia paralytica, a disease of the brain. He died on the 25th of January 1891. The cause of his death was listed as dementia paralytica caused by hereditary chronic disease, overwork and sadness. In 1914, Theo's body was exhumed from the resting place in Utrecht in the Netherlands and reburied with his brother at Auvers-sur-Oise at the wish of his widow Joanna, so the brothers could lie together eternally. After the death of her husband, Joanna Van Gogh was instrumental in Vincent's rise to fame. She worked assiduously on editing the brothers' correspondence, producing the first volume in Dutch in 1914. She also played a key role in the growth of Vincent's fame and reputation through her donations of his work to various early retrospective exhibitions. She wrote a Van Gogh family history as well. Joanna Van Gogh stayed in contact with Vincent van Gogh's friend Eugene Bosch, whom she offered the painting portrait of Eugene Bosch in July 1891. She also stayed in touch with Emile Bernard, who helped her to promote Vincent van Gogh's paintings. Joanna did remarry in 1901, but was sadly widowed again in 1914. It was after the death of her second husband that she had Theo's remains exhumed and moved to be laid in rest next to his brother Vincent. Vincent van Gogh leaves this message: "Life goes on. It goes on without me. I stop here." And this last painting really is his farewell letter.